Good evening, everyone. I'm Adrian Hopkins. I'm the director of the Mectizan donation program. And a big welcome to our 25th year anniversary event here in Atlanta. Firstly, I'd like to thank the Carter Center for accepting to host this rather momentous event. You know, it's not often we hear about health programs that go on for 25 years, but after 25 years, we're still scaling up. So there's something unique about this program, and that's part of what we want to celebrate tonight. You've been looking at a video this evening. That video has given you some idea of not just what's been done in the past, but what we hope for the future. But what we're going to have tonight is a panel discussion, followed by questions and answers, which we hope will come from you on the floor, so you can start thinking of them already. But what we're going to hear from the panel is going to be a lot about courageous decisions in industry, novel ideas in public health, how to reach millions of people with a drug, how to do advocacy at the highest level to get programs going. But just to put it in context, I want to mention two individuals very briefly. The first individual was someone who was brought to my hospital almost blind. He was just able to see light and dark. I actually knew him because he was a ferryman. Well, ferryman's a little bit of perhaps a grand title. He used to paddle me across one of the tributaries of the Congo River in a dugout canoe when I was going on supervision. And we had to put the motorbike in the dugout canoe, which was all right until his big one got broken. And we were in a small one, and there were crocodiles all around, and I was trying to balance the motorbike. But that's another story. He was brought in almost blind. He had been treated with a drug called diethylcarbamazine, or DEC. And DEC managed to kill off the bugs that cause river blindness, Onchocerca volvulus. But it destroyed his vision. We managed to save some of his vision in the end, but he never paddled me across that river again. That was the only option we had in those days to treat patients with onchocerciasis. And the decision was, it's better to let these people go blind slowly than treat them and speed up the blindness. Those were the decisions we faced. But 24 years ago, I was working in the middle of Congo. Those of you know Joseph Conrad's book, Heart of Darkness. I was working there where Mr. Kurtz used to, well, I wouldn't say work, but where he lived in the middle of Congo. And I still remember a patient, I looked at his eyes with a slit lamp, and you could see the filaria swimming in the liquid in his eye. And we had just received some Mectizan. Just been sent, well, in those days it was from the Merck humanitarian program, but we got these drugs. We treated him with Mectizan. And I watched those eyes gradually get better, not get worse. And that has been the real impact of this disease. Those are individuals. We talk now in millions. We're going to talk about how those programs were set up. But that's the context of what it means to be living in these countries. This would never have been possible, obviously, without the donation of Mectizan. And we're going to hear not just how this program got started, but I'm sure we're going to be looking to the future, look at the programs that have been set up. So for this panel discussion, we have asked Dr. Mark Rosenberg, who currently serves as the president and CEO of the Task Force for Global Health, where the Mectizan donation program is housed. We've asked him to introduce the speakers and to moderate the panel discussion for us and to run the question and answers. Before assuming his present position, Dr. Rosenberg worked in CDC for 20 years in various fields, in smallpox, in enteric diseases. He was instrumental in setting up a national center for injury prevention and control and became its first permanent director. Dr. Rosenberg's also done some research on collaboration in global health and is the lead author in a book called Real Collaboration: What Global Health Needs to Succeed. He's also co-editor-in-chief of the International, or was co-editor-in-chief of the International Journal for Injury Control and Safety Promotion. So he comes from a very varied background, and those who know the task force know is a very varied place to be working. So I hand over to you, Mark, for the panel discussion and questions. Thank you.
This is an extraordinary bit of history, and we're really very lucky and privileged to hear about it. And I want to start by introducing Roy Vagelos. Dr. Vagelos was the force behind Merck's decision in 1987 to provide a drug, this drug you'll hear about, Mectizan, free as long as necessary to eliminate the devastating disease river blindness, which was potentially affecting millions and millions in Africa and Central America. I next want to introduce Bill Foege, who's a professor emeritus of international health at Emory University. He worked in the successful campaign to eradicate smallpox in the 70s. He became chief of the CDC Smallpox Eradication Program and was appointed director of the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, CDC, in 1977. He's a strong proponent of disease eradication and control and has taken an active role in the eradication of guinea worm, polio, and measles, and the elimination of river blindness. He's a recipient of many awards, most recently the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Barack Obama, the highest award given by this country to a civilian. And he's the author of more than 125 professional publications and at least one book you should rush out and buy, House on Fire, The Story of Smallpox Eradication in India. Bill, it's a delight to have you here. I've known President Carter since he began his campaign to become and succeed in becoming the greatest ex-president this country has ever known. He was before that the 39th President of the United States. He founded the Carter Center in 1982, and this is therefore the 30th anniversary of this wonderful nonpartisan and nonprofit organization. It's guided by a fundamental commitment to human rights and the alleviation of human suffering. It seeks to prevent and resolve conflicts, enhance freedom and democracy, and improve health throughout the world. Happy anniversary, President Carter.
Thank you, Bob.
President Carter is University Distinguished Professor at Emory University and the author of 27 books. On December 10th, 2002, the Norwegian Nobel Committee awarded the Nobel Peace Prize to Mr. Carter for his decades of untiring effort to find peaceful solutions to international conflicts, to advance democracy and human rights, and to promote economic and social development. In his pursuit of these goals, he has been tireless, working with his wife, Rosalind, for years to do good around the world in the area of peace and health. He has worked closely with the Carter Center and helped build a program on neglected tropical diseases. He's worked very closely with Bill Foege for a long time. And I've mentioned his extraordinary ex-First Lady, one of the most extraordinary ex-First Ladies as well, Rosalind Carter, and their deep commitment to serve. And I believe he's been influenced by his mother, who went to work in India at a ripe old age when most people are thinking of retiring. She went to do good overseas. Welcome to all three of you. You're such a distinguished group. It's really a delight and an honor to be here with you. We don't have any specific time limits. We don't have rules. You don't have to interrupt the moderator. And there will be no rebuttals. And what I'd like to do is start first with a question to you, Dr. Vagelos, and then a question to Bill in follow-up, and then a question to President Carter. We have 3 sections that we want to hit. We want to talk about the origins of the program. We want to talk about the lessons learned, and then we'll come to talk a little bit about the impact of the program. And we'll keep moving through these areas, but again, please take your time. The stage is yours. This is not formal, and it's really our privilege to be here with you tonight. Let me start, Dr. Vagelos, with the question about how did Merck conceive of this donation for onchocerciasis or for river blindness? This is something that had never been done before. Where did the idea come from? Right. It wasn't a business model. It wasn't proposed as the new business model to give away as much drugs as would be needed for as long as you need. And there was no model, really, for a mass drug administration program like this. So where did this come from? What was the motivation behind it? What can you tell us?
First of all, Mark, thank you. Let me just say I'm really pleased to be here for this occasion and to be with these giants, President Carter and Bill Foege, with whom I've been associated, really, through this program, largely. But to give you a little history, I joined Merck in 1975 as head of research, so I'm a research-type person, which is really all I have ever been good at. And the research organization at Merck was very, very strong at the time, and they had a very good history in antibiotics, and so they had programs where they used really soil microorganisms to discover new molecules. Mostly they were looking for antibiotics, but there was a group also interested in drugs that killed parasites, and the group was very good at that. We had a parasitologist who happens to be here today, Bill Campbell, who was world expert. But the first drug that came out of Merck to kill parasites was a chemical. And so the idea was to make a drug that was better than that and possibly go back to soil microorganisms where so many interesting things had come from. And so there was a large program in looking at microorganisms from everywhere in the world. One source of soil microorganisms was Japan. And we were sent, negotiated actually, that organisms, interesting looking soil microorganisms, be sent to the Merck Research Labs from the Kitasato Institute in Japan. And our microbiologists dealt with growing these microorganisms, the soil microorganism, and looking at the broth to see what it might do. And one of the things they examined the broth in was a special animal model of a parasitic disease, where they put a parasite in the mouse, and then looked to see whether the drug, the fluid from the growth of this microorganism, would kill or prevent the thing from growing. And they came in and were very excited. They had found one that was incredibly potent. It was so much more potent than anything that had ever been seen before that the whole laboratory became sort of focused on getting that stuff out of that juice that was made by that microorganism. It turned out to be ivermectin. Our chemicals, our people who analyzed the chemicals coming from microorganisms were superstars. Then they quickly were able to determine the structure, and the people who looked at various, whatever these things would do, looked at the parasites and discovered that this ivermectin class, which was a large molecule, was really very special. But it wasn't quite as safe as they thought it could be. And so they spent a good deal of time tweaking the chemistry and finally came up with ivermectin, a single chemical change, the reduction of a double bond, for those of you who are chemists. And this stuff then was able to kill all kinds of parasites. In the laboratory, that was Bill Campbell, would show that it was killing all kinds of parasites. But it did not kill some of the very important parasites of humans. And that was tapeworms and hookworms. And so it wasn't going to be a drug for humans. It was put on the shelf. And instead, it was studied for killing worms of animals, various parasites. And it was incredibly active in doing this and safe. And so quickly the laboratory organized to study that aspect of what this drug could do, ivermectin, and it became then a drug of choice for killing gastrointestinal parasites of first horses, then cattle, then sheep, pigs, and ultimately they looked at dog heartworm, which is of course a different kind of worm, but it became a very important product. Now, Bill Campbell went on studying this drug, ivermectin, and noted that it was able to kill microfilaria and some kind of a parasite in horses. And there was a guy, one of our clinicians, who was an expert in infectious diseases in Africa. He had been in sub-Saharan Africa. And so Bill knew about the possibility of killing microfilaria, and the doctor, the infectious disease doctor, Muhammad Aziz, had seen river blindness. And so the two of them concocted the idea that this drug might work in this disease. They came to see me. And of course, we had this nice product that was now growing for animals, being used throughout the world, really. And they had said, you know, this might work in river blindness. Should we give it a try? I said, of course. And so Muhammad Aziz took some of this, formulated, and now is a tablet, not a horse-sized, but a human-sized tablet. And he went to Dakar in Senegal, and there he felt, oh, I should tell you a little bit about the disease. It's caused by a parasite. The major symptoms of this disease are caused by the embryonic form, the microfilaria of a worm, and they're in the skin. They cause terrible itching in the patients, but it's transmitted. The disease is transmitted by the bite of a fly. The fly, a black fly, that grows along the riverbeds, and therefore the term river blindness, would bite someone and pick up the microfilaria from the skin. Within the fly, the microfilaria undergoes a change and becomes capable of becoming an adult. So when that fly bites somebody else, it introduces a more mature form of that parasite, which can then become an adult worm. And so they inject into the skin. The males and females get together and form lumps in the skin, and they of course make lots of microfilaria, which crawl all through the skin, causing this enormous itching, ultimately get into the eyes and cause the problem that was referred to earlier. And they cause inflammation, ultimate blindness. Well, so Muhammad went to Dakar, took a pinch of skin over the hip of some of these people who had obvious river blindness and counted the microfilaria. Then gave a tablet, came back in a month, and took a pinch of skin, and they were all gone. So he came back to the lab they were all gone after one tablet. And so he came back, and we got very excited. And so we called experts in the World Health Organization, parasitologists, come and visit. They came, and they're wonderful people. They had wonderful, I remember, hand-painted ties, and they were lovely people. And they looked at the data, which said that all the microfilaria were gone, and the people were fine. And they said, someone screwed up. These data can't be right, because if you killed all those microfilaria, the patients would have all kinds of side effects. Well, we didn't have all kinds of side effects. So they left. They said, first of all, probably the patients were not very heavily infected, and therefore, that's why you were able to clear. At any rate, they went away, and that was a terrific challenge to Merck researchers, because they were not going to be left high and dry by the World Health Organization folks. And so we turned on a very large program to develop and do the clinical studies that went on starting about 1981 through 1987. And now we did that at Merck Research with the full knowledge that these were among the poorest people in the world. And so, but that was no reason to stop. We carried out this study with a very large study and demonstrated that if you gave a tablet and came back at 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, there were no bugs. The microfilaria were gone. Towards the end, they started to reappear. So at that point, we knew we had a drug that could be given as a tablet probably once per year, and it would affect and prevent the side effects. All these things that we were seeing, the itching, getting into the blindness, because that's all caused by the microfilaria. And so we saw this excitement building. The word started to creep out of Merck that Merck had a special drug. And so the word was getting around, what was Merck going to do? And of course, our marketing people said, don't worry. We'll find a way to do it. We'll find people who will be able to afford it. Well, that was, of course, nonsense. Often the case. So as the studies were finished, we needed to file all the results of the clinical studies somewhere. Not the FDA, because there's no disease in this country. They didn't know the disease. Paris was the place. France was the place because of French Africa. And there were people in Paris who had the disease. And so they were willing to take the filing. And so we knew that the French were very slow in review and approval of drugs, especially from the U.S. And so we're pretty relaxed. We're talking at this point among the executive group how we will get the drug to people. And we started making visits to governments and ultimately focused on the U.S. government and visited with the chief of staff of the president, Don Regan, President Reagan's chief of staff. We visited with the Deputy Secretary of State, John Whitehead. In each instance, I explained the disease, the miraculous way that this drug could solve the problem, and said, and we offered to sell it to the government at cost, and I estimated that the initial cost would be about $2 million. And in each instance, the boss said very excitedly, we want to do this. But as I left the office with the person who was their assistant, they explained to me that they really didn't have any money. And in both instances, they were instructed to do it, but they didn't do it. And they said they didn't have any money in the budget. And I had to understand that. So we left, and at that point, rather frustrated, we learned that the French regulatory authority was going to approve the drug in 3 days. And we had no plan. So we got the group together again, the people who worked with me, and we said, what are we going to do? The world knows about this drug. This company has never failed to get the drug to people who needed it. And so we decided that the company at that point would do it. We had a press conference in Washington, attended by everybody who had anything to do with the clinical study and all the senators and people who wanted to take credit for it. And we announced at that time that Merck would contribute the drug free to anyone in the world who needed it for as long as it was needed. And that happened so fast that I never checked with the board of directors. But it was a bombshell, clearly. The reaction of the people in the company was incredible. I mean, they thought, this is a great company. And the company, by the way, was a great company and was extremely successful. So they said, to be in a company that would do something like this is so terrific. So the reaction was extraordinarily positive. And the same was true from stockholders, which was surprising to me. But we didn't have a single negative letter on that decision. And so we were going to contribute the drug, but how to do it in a way that was rational and would be acceptable to the people who would be receiving the drug. And John Lyons and Jerry Jackson knew a guy who had led the smallpox eradication, Bill Foege. And so they went to see him. We discussed it. They went to see Bill to convince him to chair what became Mectizan. So ivermectin, the animal drug, became Mectizan for human use. Same drug. And we convinced Bill to take on the Mectizan expert committee chairmanship. And Bill happened to be running the President Carter's center at that time as executive director, or whatever the big shot title was. and he agreed to take it on. And this was 1987. I will tell you something that was very sad. Mohammed Aziz, at the time of the approval and the announcement, was of course, at the press conference. And I noticed that he was bent over and he was having abdominal pain. And within a few days, we discovered he had stomach cancer. And he died within months of that decision. But he lived to see his program evolve and do this. At any rate, the decision was made at that time. The die was cast. At the next board meeting, I was asked by one of the directors, why I hadn't contacted the directors. And I explained that it happened so fast that we had to do so many things that I really didn't think about it, but would any of you have made a different decision? And I looked around the table and nobody would have made a different decision. And so we got away with it. And that's the way it started. And that's where Bill took over, and it sort of made it possible for people to accept a drug in sub-Saharan Africa that was not being taken by Americans.
It's a pretty amazing story. So your company had not failed to get a drug to people who needed it before, and you were sure as heck not going to fail this time.
Well, yeah, let me just back up one moment, because the company had one other opportunity in the past, and that was after World War II. Merck had been in on the development of streptomycin, an antibiotic which was the first antibiotic that could control tuberculosis. And after World War II, there was famine in Japan. And people were starving, and so there was rampant tuberculosis. They had no drug, of course. Merck had the drug, and they could not afford it. Of course, they were destitute at the time. So a number of companies came and talked with, at that time, George W. Merck, who was still running the place. And they agreed to a non-royalty license to a number of companies, which then manufactured streptomycin and stopped the epidemic of tuberculosis in Japan. So we had a precedent, and the company's always been like that. I mean, we followed the leader.
An impressive company, an impressive leader. So you sent people to go talk to this fellow who had helped to eradicate smallpox and
Absolutely.
had led childhood immunization. So when they come to you, Bill, to ask you, will you be involved with this? What was your thinking? What was your initial reaction? And how did you make the decision you did?
Yes. First, what a privilege it's been to work on this program and to work with President Carter and Dr. Vagelos, and to watch how Mark has been a steward of this program since. I mean, this is an absolutely unique program. And Dr. Vagelos didn't mention it, but when he approved the money for the research in Africa, they had already done a study that said they could not make any money on this. And to me, that's the most important decision that you made, that you were willing to do that even when you couldn't make money on it. With many programs, we spend time trying to figure out why did things go wrong, or why didn't they work out at all? And I can tell you with this program, I have over and over wondered, why did it work better than anything we could have imagined? And I'll give you 5 quick examples of things that worried me. It turned out not to be a problem at all. The first was the day that your people were here. I didn't quite believe that you would give this for as long as it was needed. And so I pressed that point. They left and made a phone call, probably to you, and they came back and said, we actually don't know what else this drug might be good for, so we have to be a little careful. But for onchocerciasis in humans, we will give it free for as long as it's needed. Now, that's just an amazing statement on your part. Second thing that worried me, what are the side effects when you start getting into large numbers? It's one thing to get to the clearance for the drug, but what happens when you get up to 100,000 people? What if you have 1 death in 100,000 people? That's 10 deaths in 1 million. And so I worried about that. And just to make this part quick, it turns out to be one of the safest drugs that you can imagine. The third thing that worried me, how do you get people to take this drug if the benefits are not going to be seen for decades in terms of not losing your sight? People don't work that way. It's why you can't get people to stop smoking. They won't think that far in advance. Again, it could not have worked out better. Dr. Vagelos explained how this black fly, which is called Similium damnosum, and how would you like that for a last name? And how it deposits this, and then the microfilaria. What happens with the microfilaria is people start itching. And when they get a really heavy infection, it's the first thing they know in the morning and the last thing they know at night, and they cannot get rid of this itching. It's a terrible thing to watch, as people will actually pick up rocks and try to get deeper and deeper. After taking Mectizan, some of these people had the first itch-free day that they could ever remember. When that happens, more people want to use this. So this concern about how can you get people to take the drug, it turned out to be no concern at all. It so happens it's also 100% effective for treating roundworms, and people know when they've been treated for roundworms, and so it was easy to get people to come back a year later. A fourth concern, there were people at Merck, not Dr. Vagelos, people at Merck that worried about are there political implications if the Carter Center is involved in this? Well, in those days, there was no daylight between the task force and the Carter Center. We actually rented space here. And so it was very easy to put this into the task force. But then as soon as President Carter got involved, we found, yes, there are political implications. When a U.S. president goes to meet with the head of state in Africa and begins talking about a neglected tropical disease called onchocerciasis, I can tell you that head of state becomes interested. And if that head of state becomes interested, the Minister of Health becomes very interested. And so there were absolute political implications of this. And to get a corporation giving a free drug and getting a U.S. president to be the marketer, I mean, this is a combination you just can't believe. So this turned out to be far better than anything we could have imagined. The fifth and last thing that I would mention, there was a small but vocal public health group that believed it was wrong to get involved with companies that are for profit. And anytime I would talk about the Mectizan program, someone would get up. How could you work with people who are making profit when this is their bottom line, is profit? Well, you know, Robert Louis Stevenson said everyone's selling something, even the person asking that question. But my standard answer became, we underestimate the amount of altruism to be found in people who work in corporations, just as we underestimate the amount of greed in public health people and church workers. But how did this turn out to be so good? Well, it turned out to be so good because when people work with people like Brenda Colatrella, Ken Brown, with people like Charlie Fedek, they find out that these people are actually public servants who just happen to be paid by Merck. So this program, just everything about it turned out to be better than we could have predicted.
Well, thanks, Bill. So you got the answers to the 5 hesitations, and you said, yes, we'll go with you, we'll help to distribute it. And you, President Carter, have been referred to as the marketer for Roy Vagelos. But I suspect you see your decision to work on river blindness somewhat differently. How did you decide to get into this program? What was your first reaction when you heard about it, and how did you bring the Carter Center into it?
Well, first of all, Mark, I'm going to demonstrate something that was not seen on the stage last night, and that is genuine humility. I feel like I'm in the presence of giants on my right, and I was just delighted and thrilled and ultimately gratified to know what Roy Vagelos had recommended, offered, and what Bill Foege had accepted on our behalf. So when Bill consulted with me, as I always did, I accepted Bill's recommendation without further question. The next thing was, how do you take these free pills and put them in the mouths of literally thousands or millions of people in distant countries in Africa? And how do you work with heads of state who have never heard of onchocerciasis unless they live in a village that has a little black fly? And how do you get down to the Minister of Health and so forth? And that was what I decided to do. And it was one of the, obviously, the all-time most wise decisions that I've ever made to adopt this with open arms and with a grateful heart. And it was a challenge for us. And ultimately, the Carter Center has now been to 30,000 villages in 11 different countries. And we have taken 160 million of the pills that Roy Vagelos has given to us free of charge, or Merck has given to us, and put them in the mouths of people. And we very quickly found that a person in a little village alongside a stream, or formerly alongside a stream, who has horrible itching and discoloration of skin and a sore on the back with adult worms in it, and the prospect of going blind, looks on this miraculous pill with a great deal of pleasure and values it. In fact, we found that a woman who has this disease, if she had a choice between that little pill and a diamond of the same size and she couldn't get another pill, she'd rather have the pill than a diamond. So we had a problem of in corrupt countries, and there's always some corruption in almost any country, how do you get this pill through all this labyrinthine government structure down to the people who actually need the medicine? And we began to explore those villages, and I began to deal, as Bill has said, with the heads of state. And I would go into different countries where we knew the disease to be prevalent, and to talk to the head of state, and he would assemble sometimes the entire cabinet there. The health minister and the education minister and the finance minister and the transportation minister would all come together, and we would say, we want to come in and do this program, and they would ultimately agree. And quite often we would sign a memorandum of understanding or a contract or a covenant between the Carter Center and the nation of such and such to carry out this work. And we then began to see the success of it. I never really realized how we were getting paid of money to get the medicine that Merck gave us free into the villages. And I was making a graduation speech in the university in Texas. And there was a quiet fellow sitting on the side of the reception room, and somebody took me over and introduced him. It was John Moores. And I found out that John Moores had organized the River Blindness Foundation, and he was financing all of this cost out of his own hip pocket. And so I thanked him, and then later we got the World Bank and others to help us to alleviate the concern of John Moore. So over a period of years, we've just gotten to be deeply grateful, not only to Merck and to Bill Foege and to the Centers for Disease Control and the task force, but also to people like John Moores and the Lions organization. Happen to be a Lion myself and a former leader of the Lions Club International. And the Lions Club provides funding, for instance, for the eradication of diseases that call blindness. So that's what we have done in the last number of years. And we soon saw that in South America, in Latin America, including Mexico and Guatemala and Venezuela and Brazil and so forth, we had this disease of not as prevalent an attack as it was in some parts of Africa, but very persistent. And our people developed the program of not only giving the annual medicines that Roy described that would have to be repeated the following year, but we experimented with the elimination of a disease, not just the control of it. And that was a major step forward that's been taken over the last 25 years, is shifting from an emphasis just on control to the actual doing away with the disease altogether. And so we found that by giving 2 pills a year, or sometimes 4 pills a year, that it would actually eliminate the adult worms that create the microfilariae within the bodies. So now we have treated this disease in 6 Latin American countries, and we only have a tiny portion of Latin America still with the disease on a river bottom between Venezuela and Mexico with one native tribe, Yamanamis, and that's the only place we have this disease left in Latin America. So with that experience of doing away with the disease completely in an area, we have begun to experiment with that in Africa, in Sudan, which is now northern Sudan, and also in Uganda. So we hope that in the future, we've now expanded this to Ethiopia and to Nigeria, and we hope that we can prove continually in increasingly difficult places in Africa that we can actually eliminate the disease altogether. So even this year, at the early stages of this program, we are stopping treatment of 1 million people a year in Guatemala and Mexico and Uganda and Sudan because they no longer have the disease at all. It's been eliminated. And one other thing I'd like to add, and that's an economic question, because this little black fly only breeds in a rapidly flowing stream that tumbles over rocks and creates a lot of oxygen, kind of like a trout stream. And so over a period of thousands of years, the people that lived alongside those little streams found that they got the disease. If they moved away from the streams up into the mountainsides, they can avoid the flies. So what they've done was abandon the rich bottomland that's so productive, and instead of the bottomlands that produce a lot of crops, they were trying to farm in rocky land up on the side of hills. And once they get the mectizan for 1 year in a village, and the itching and so forth goes away, they can move back into the bottomland and have an enormous bonanza of increased quality of life just because they can grow 5 times as much maize or wheat or sorghum or whatever it is that creates life support. And so it's a multiple benefit that's come from this tremendous demonstration of generosity. And what Merck has done as an unselfish corporate giant has set an example, and I wouldn't say shamed, but they have encouraged other pharmaceutical companies to try to follow in Merck's footsteps in being generous. And I want to thank Roy Vagelos for all of that has
Talk
proceeded.
about big footsteps, big shoes.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to make sure people realize that this year is the 25th anniversary, and we're celebrating 1 billion tablets that have been distributed that came from a vision, a dream, a sense that you couldn't let people who need it go without it, and you would work together to do it. Let me ask you, you've been involved with other diseases as well. And are there some lessons that you learned from the experience with Mectizan and river blindness that you think are applicable to some of the other diseases that are being controlled, being eliminated, or even being eradicated?
Well, a little before we started with Mectizan and river blindness, we began to work on a disease called dracunculiasis, or guinea worm. And guinea worm also comes out of the water, and people drink filthy water from a mud hole that's filled up during the rainy season. And then this egg, in effect, goes in the human body. And in a year's time, it grows into a worm about this long, which penetrates the skin from the inside, causes a terrible sore that destroys muscle. And it takes 30 days for this worm to emerge. And so we adopted that as one of the so-called neglected tropical diseases that we would address. And we found then that when we went to the chiefs of state, the heads of state, the kings or prime ministers or presidents, quite often they didn't know about this disease because it just happens in the remote villages like river blindness does. And so we found that going to individual villages and teaching them about the medicine and what they could do about it with river blindness was similar to what we had done with guinea worm. And so we had 23,600 villages that we ultimately found with guinea worm. We've been to every one of them, and we've now cut that down from 3.5 million cases in 20 countries to about 500 cases that only exist now primarily in southern Sudan. So we've had experience with guinea worm. But side by side, these two diseases have been some of the most gratifying demonstrations of progress that could be possibly made with neglected tropical diseases. And it primarily depends on the cooperation of heads of state and ministers of health, yes, but primarily the villagers that we go to see and offer this benefit, and they cooperate with us and do it honestly and fairly to improve their own lives. And for the first time, it gives them, I would say, a sense of confidence in foreigners who come in and say, we're going to help you, but quite often they are disappointed or misled. And secondly, it gives people hope that their future can be better. And it gives them a sense of self-respect. And it forms, you might say, a fraternity now that exists with just onchocerciasis or river blindness. Everybody on earth that now works with river blindness because of a contribution that Merck has made now forms kind of a fraternity to get together every year and say, what can we do to improve on this program? And so we feel like we're a small part of a great community on earth that's doing away with the terrible affliction of these microorganisms that formerly caused terrible itching and suffering and also cause ultimately blindness.
You know, I have to interject one thing, which is really striking to me, and that is the fact that a company had the technology ability to produce a drug like this, and that there was available at that time a Bill Foege, who had done what he had done with smallpox, and that we had, on the other hand, President Carter, who was becoming the person who is the greatest former president of the United States, and all the stuff that he was able to do, and the the two were able to put this together in an incredible way. What are the chances that you're going to get three characters like us all at one time to get it done? But it did set an example, and that is to other companies. And so we had then lymphatic filariasis that came along. Now, of course, we soon found that mectizan also can control that, but albendazole, a drug of GlaxoSmithKline, and GlaxoSmithKline essentially followed the program of Merck, and similarly Pfizer with trachoma, and the drug that they had, the antibiotic, which they could control trachoma, a very major cause of blindness. And so one company after another was seeing what a very successful company was doing, and they wanted to look like that. So that all helped.
Did everything.
And I just want to highlight one of the things you said, President Carter, that this gave you a sense that you could change people's lives for the better.
Yes.
A very empowering and very important lesson. It's not so different from a lesson you talked about, Bill, with smallpox eradication, learning that this is a cause and effect world, and that things happen for a reason, and that the things we do can make a huge difference. This helps us continue and take on new diseases, new challenges as we go.
One thing that we decided quite early was not to put the Carter Center's brand or my name on what we were doing in Latin America and Africa and other places. We called it the Global 2000 program, and it's of helping with, river blindness or with other diseases. So we'd go into a village and we'd tell them the Global 2000 program would do this. So later, the president of that country, when we began to have success, could say, my Global 2000 program has eliminated this disease. Or the local village mayor could say, village chief could say, my Global 2000 program has done this or that. And so it's been a matter of neither Merck nor CDC nor the Lions Clubs nor the Carter Center claiming credit for it. We really want to give credit to the people that actually did the work and received the benefits with their own initiative.
And that ownership of the program is really key to its success.
And many organizations got involved. Right. After all, we could not have done this without getting access to the village entries of World Health Organization. Right. And so the World Health Organization got into it, the World Bank got into it. President Carter mentioned the Moores, John Moores. The Moores were a young couple at the time with a lot of money, and they were looking for something to do with the money. And it's amazing that once they heard about river blindness, they named their foundation the River Blindness Foundation. They bought it totally and made fantastic contributions. So there are many people who entered the field that became ultimately very important, because the drug won't do it by itself. It's got to get to the patients, and there's got to be an infrastructure. And then the communities that had to buy on. And that was thanks to President Carter getting to the leaders of the communities to get the communities involved in working with a private company on one hand and all the agencies that were involved.
So this notion of partnership really expanded and extended. Bill?
I wanted to tell a story about President Carter. It was a Thursday night, and he was being given an award in Washington, D.C. At the same time, the mectizan expert committee was meeting in France. And late on that Thursday, Eric Otteson, who then worked for WHO, gave a report of the combination of two drugs, mectizan and albendazole, and what it could do for lymphatic filariasis. People were very excited, and I remember that we broke up after asking the question, who makes the drug, SmithKline Beecham? Does anyone know anyone in the company high enough up to actually give us some drug? No one did. But we continued talking over dinner. The next morning, I'm chairing the session at 10 o'clock, and someone puts a note in front of me. President Carter is on the phone. Would you take the call? Now, how would you answer? President Carter said, it's 5 o'clock in the morning in Atlanta, but he said, I'm so excited, I needed to talk to you. He asked me, does the name Jan Leschly mean anything to you? And I said, no, it doesn't. He said, well, I had dinner with him last night in Washington, D.C., and he happens to be the CEO of SmithKline Beecham. And as we talked, he said how impressed he was with what Merck had done with Mectizan. And one of the values that people probably didn't see ahead of time was that it inspires loyalty in your workforce because people like to work for a company that does this sort of thing. And Jan Leschly asked President Carter, do you have any ideas on something that SmithKline Beecham could do? I mean, talk about serendipity. President Carter went back to him and he made the donation, and that's how the lymphatic filariasis program started.
Serendipity is an amazing, amazing thing. I want to ask you one last question, then open it up to questions from our audience here. You took a trip, Dr. Vagelos and President Carter, to Chad, I think, in 1996, and you actually had 94.
Just before you left Merck.
And in 1994, you saw patients, you saw people suffering from onchocerciasis. You remember those visits with people, and how did that affect you, actually seeing the people, seeing the suffering that you had heard about?
I saw these people who clearly were living in mud huts. They were the poorest people I had ever seen. And we saw, you'll recall President Carter, a young woman with a baby, suckling a baby who was already blind. And I thought, wow, this is a disease that strikes people down, not old people, but as soon as they accumulate enough of these microfilaria, they're going to lose their vision. And so it has the effect that President Carter mentioned, and that is they moved away from the rivers where they had the very fertile land, but those who were carrying these microfilaria were going to lose their lives just simply because they could not live in that way. And so the possibility of doing something major was really important.
I remember the village had just begun to experience river blindness. They had never known it before in history. But the Chinese had come in and built a dam to provide irrigation water for the rice crop in a very altruistic way. But water coming out of the dam tumbled over rocks and formed a lot of oxygen in the water, and so the little black flies had begun to breed, and practically everyone in the little villages had accumulated river blindness, including the little baby who was blind, and the mother had early stages of it as well. So this was a vivid demonstration of how this disease could originate when it hadn't been known before. But the wonderful thing is that once you go into a village and give everybody the pill, the Mectizan free from Merck, they become so excited that it's overwhelming. And I remember Dr. Vagelos and I were talking earlier this afternoon that the people waiting in line to get the Mectizan pills were so close together, men and women, you couldn't put a newspaper between them. I mean, they were just jammed up like this so nobody could get in between them. Because, as I said, this pill was so valuable to them when they found out about it that it was the most important thing in their lives. It was a very emotional experience for both of us.
Yeah.
Worth more than diamonds. This really was magic.
It was.
This pill
magic.
wrought magic.
Yeah.
You talked about, last question, Dr. Vagelos, you talked about how much this meant to the employees at Merck. It was very important to know that their company was doing this. How much did your involvement in this mean to you? I'd ask this to all three of you.
Well, first of all, you know, of course, that I was trained as a physician, and I went into medicine because I wanted to take care of patients. Everybody who goes to medical school really is thinking that he will become a doctor and take care of patients. And so I was a very well-trained doctor and had left medicine with the idea that ultimately I could affect human health by something that I was doing in research. And so by being at Merck, I had an opportunity to get into one disease after another where we made major improvements in health of people. And so it meant everything to me, because this is ultimately what my life has been about.
I remember going to Merck after 2 or 3 years to thank them. And in the meantime, we had made about a 5-minute film, a movie, that showed people in the village before and after Mectizan and the miraculous change it made in their lives. So Dr. Vagelos had arranged for about several thousand people to assemble outside the plant, the Merck plant in New Jersey, under a big tent. And so we showed the film, and I made a brief comment. And in the, among the, I'd say 5,000 people, there were stenographers and secretaries and research scientists and marketers and salesmen and all that kind of stuff. And half the people were crying with emotion. And that demonstrated to me so vividly how everybody in Merck, as an employee, even at the lowest level, say a janitor, felt, I'm helping to eradicate or do away with this terrible disease in remote villages in Africa. Later, I went to Pfizer Corporation, who at that time were holding back they didn't realize how generous they were until I got there. But I described to them in a large crowd what Merck had done. Yeah. And very soon, Pfizer was giving us the antibiotic to treat trachoma.
So but the effect on the ability to recruit people, I would say, extended several decades. People wanted to work in a company like Merck. Right. I don't think there's any question about that. And there are lots of Merck people here who I'm sure would agree with that. It was a very special place to work.
And still is, I'm sure.
And still is.
And still is.
I think there are 3 different levels. One, personally, as I already mentioned, this was a tremendously satisfying program. Number 2, to watch how it changed Merck. You go into the lobby of Merck and you find the sculpture that the Carter Center has here of a small boy leading a blind man with a stick. And you think everyone that comes to visit Merck, they see that first, a sculpture for a product where they're not making any money. And there's something about that that's transformative. The third thing is to see how this changed global health. Most global health programs have a superstructure someplace at WHO or at UNICEF or UNDP or World Bank. This doesn't have that. This is a simple program with a committee that decides who gets the drug. So you don't have that. People are starting to talk about Willie Sutton again and Sutton's law about you go where the money is. But I always thought Sutton's second law was very interesting. He told a reporter once who asked, what did you learn in life? And he said, I learned that I could get much farther with a soft word and a gun than I could with the soft word alone. and here you see how far you can get with enthusiasm and a product that works farther than with enthusiasm alone. And it's, to me, this has changed the way global health works.
Yeah.
Well, thanks.
I don't think you can improve on that. Why don't we?
I don't think we can improve on what all 3 of you said, but let me open it to questions from the audience. And I would just ask first, identify yourself, and then let's have your question.
It's hard for us to see you.
Stand up if you do have a question or...
I think there's one over there.
Uh-huh. There's microphones here at the side.
Gentlemen, I'm Jim Irvin, the past international president with Lions Clubs International. And I'm very honored to be here tonight. I have some of my fellow Lions and another past president, Frank Moore from Alabama, who sits on our steering committee for LCIF. But we've been in partnership, of course, with the Carter Center since the middle 90s. And we've been very proud of our King Lion, President Carter, and all he's done. But we want to thank Merck and all of you for what you've done, especially for all the donations that you have made for the Mectizan program. But you know, we look back and ask our foundation what we had done, and through 25 multiple year grants just in the Mectizan program in the Americas and in African countries, we have provided more than $34 million in helping this program. So we're very proud of what we've done. So on behalf of all the Lions in 206 countries around the world, we want to thank you and congratulate you. And I so happen to have the honor of being at the meeting with President Carter in New York with Pfizer when we got that donation, and it was a pretty good show. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
By the way, Jim Irvin was the international president of Lions, and one of my also heroes. He lives not too far from me, so I've known him a long time. But the first time we gave Mectizan when I was president was in Ghana, and Jim Irvin was with me. And everywhere that we've been in the world, when they had a Lions organization, every member of the Lions clubs in different towns and cities would join in and become kind of an unpaid staff of volunteers to help us do away with rubber blindness. So the Lions clubs deserve a lot of credit, and not only for the $34 million, but for the uncountable number of hours that Lions members have put in worldwide.
They have done an extraordinary job.
Alan Hinman from the Task Force for Global Health. Thank you all. You've demonstrated, I think, very nicely how one action, Merck's original decision, can have substantial, broader effects and leading to other things. And I would relate that also to the service club community, not just Lions, who've been very heavily involved with blindness prevention for many years and are now moving into measles, but also Rotary International and its commitment to polio eradication. So my question is, how do you see the future of pharmacophilanthropy and the involvement of voluntary organizations such as Lions and Rotary in bringing about further great changes in global health?
Bill, you want?
Well, Ellen, that's a very good question. And global health has changed so much in the last decade that those of us who were trained in it don't even recognize the field anymore. The tools have changed and improved. The resources have increased. The political interest has increased. But what is truly astounding, you cannot go to a university or college in this country now without having a large group of students who want to get into global health. So I think the social setting is changing, and part of this is that we do realize we're all in this together. This is what Polybius said 2,000 years ago, that it may have been possible in the past for things to have happened in isolation. But he said, from this time forth, the world must be seen as an organic whole. And somehow, I think that message is getting across. We get so discouraged by the things that go wrong, but we also have this other side where Norman Cousins said, the most important thing the U.S. has ever done for the world is to show that it's possible to plan a rational future. And I think we're starting to see a rational health future. So I'm very optimistic about what is happening and the many NGOs, social groups, and so forth that want to be involved.
Well, I think one other thing about service clubs is when I came home from the Navy in 1953, I joined the Lions Club, which my father had helped to start, and I ultimately became the president of it and went on up to higher levels. And the Lions clubs adopted back in the 1920s eyesight as their number one project, and it's been prevalent ever since. But we used to collect and donate eyeglasses that people had abandoned, and to people that didn't have money enough to buy a pair of glasses. And we also used to get brooms and sell them every Christmas from the factory for the blind. All the blind people could do that worked there was to make brooms. So the Lions used to sell brooms. But I think the thing that made this program here so successful was that the Lions individual clubs all over the world, I think there are more than 45,000 of them, could actually say that what this program that you are helping to support pays dividends. There's actually a tangible result that's demonstrable of what you're donating here that you can't see. You can see a broom being sold, you can see eyeglasses being put on a person that needs it, but something that's distant, like a neglected disease in Africa, you have to be able to prove to them that what you're doing is having a direct benefit, and that's what this program has done.
So, very big one.
Right. One thing that I've observed, and that is that students now so different than they were when I was young, and that is so often they're involved in some kind of philanthropic thing while they're undergrads, and one of the things they get into is Habitat for Humanity. I mean, that wasn't around at the time when I was a student, but so many students are getting into things to help society around them, the poor, the ill, and it's quite incredible the number of things that they get into as undergrads. And medical students, the Columbia Medical School where I hang around, I would say more than half of the students have global experience in developing countries. It's quite amazing. When I was a student, maybe a handful of students would go to Africa. Now more than half our students spend some time in Africa. That's a new world.
And I know that at Harvard's premier teaching hospital, the Brigham, the draw used to be cardiac surgery or the treatment of cancer. Now the single biggest draw to people coming to that hospital is global health and their global health residency program. That attracts more people to the residency and to the medical school than any other area. It is a different world. It's a very different future out there.
I think we have one more question over here.
Let me go to Bill and then to Don at the microphone. Did you want to add something?
I just wanted to say, when I went to medical school, I could not find 3 people in the entire medical school interested in global health. When I went back for my 50th anniversary, one of my classmates said, "You'll never remember this," but he said, "We had lunch one day. I asked you what you were interested in. You said global health." He said, "I didn't say anything except to myself, and I said, what a waste." And he said, now I'm apologizing.
Don.
No, thank you. My name's Don Bundy. I'm with the World Bank, and I think there's a group of people in the audience here who'd like to identify themselves. This is the African Program for Onchocerciasis Control, who are meeting in their quarterly meeting here is in Atlanta this week. I wonder if they want to stand up just so everyone can see who's here. These are.
Let's add to this. Stay up. Anyone here who has worked on the Mectazan donation program, stand up. Anyone here who has worked on any other aspect of pharmacophilanthropy, stand up. Any other donation programs?
Don, if I'm not mistaken, the APOC program started right here in this room. I think the final decision was made right here.
So it's very appropriate for us to have you here and to acknowledge the wonderful work you do. So thanks. And it's interesting to see how it spreads. What starts here as an idea becomes a movement. Don, did you have a question?
Well, I hope the President will tell us a little bit about the start of APOC. I'm sure we'll all be very interested in that. But I did have one. I also want to point out that the only person who didn't stand up was from the Carter Center. I don't know why that was, but there you are. Just to say the Carter Center is still actively engaged. But I also wanted to make the point. I'm from the World Bank, and our role is what's called a fiscal agent. That means handling the money. And one of the things that's often overlooked in the donation from Merck is the very substantial amount of finance that also has accompanied the donation of the drugs. And that when there has been any stumbling in the delivery of the drugs, Merck has come up and been able to put in financial support directly into the trust fund to help make that happen, which is, as I say, not often recognized, or not recognized enough, I think, as an important contribution. In January this year, 13 drug companies pledged, following the example of Merck, pledged to provide drugs for neglected tropical diseases. And my question really is, how do we now begin to work with, to raise resources to deliver all of these new donations that have become available to us? I wonder if we've got any tips from the people who've faced this before.
Well, I don't know the answer. I share the question, though. You know, there's a certain cost to delivering one dose of Mectizan a year to people in a village. But when you start to try to eliminate the disease, you run into unforeseen extra costs of exploration and supervision and monitoring the progress, being rapidly able to change from one approach to another to correct a mistake. So we have a very large future cost, I think, extra for a certain period of time, say between now and the year 2020, to eliminate this disease. But the point I want to make is that whenever you can eliminate the disease, then you don't have to go back year after year with the additional dose of medicine. And we believe that by the year 2020, that in the areas that we are working in, particularly in Nigeria and in Ethiopia, there will be 18 million people who will no longer have to be treated for this disease. It's a very expensive program, and so far we don't have an assured source of funding for that project. But we figure that this will cost about $18 million. And you're talking about $1 per person among those 18 million in two major countries. That's how much it'll cost to eliminate the disease from our life forever. So it's a very good investment, but the problem is telling potential donors about this good possibility for them to join in what has been one of the most wonderful programs that I've ever seen in my life.
And one of the greatest bargains still on earth.
Sure, it's true.
Walt, did you have a question? Last question.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. One of the lessons from last night is never ask a question unless you know the answer. And one of the questions, I think that President Carter has come very close to talking about elimination in various geographic areas and certain sectors. But I haven't heard the word eradication, and I wonder if anybody on the panel would like to speak to eradication.
I'd be glad to.
Bill, you ought to do that.
Oh, Bill, go ahead.
Bill.
Walt, we should be brave enough to actually say that. And when you ask, where do you get money for these things? Well, one of the problems is Kierkegaard once told a story about someone that broke into a jewelry store and didn't steal anything. All they did was change all the price tags around. And that's the kind of world we live in, with all the price tags mixed up. And one of the things we should be doing is to try to get that straight. And what is the cost of eradication versus doing this forever in control? Jim Marks with Robert Wood Johnson Foundation has pointed out that when the Congressional Budget Office does predictions of benefits and costs, by law, they cannot look at benefits beyond 10 years in the future because of discount rates. Almost everything you do at CDC, almost everything you do with this program, the benefits go on forever. And to have that restriction means that we never get a good look at what are the costs of doing something. So we should have the courage to say, yes, we will try for eradication. If we don't make it, at least we know what the ultimate barriers are to eradication. If we choose control as our objective, we'll never know what those ultimate barriers are.
Can I just add one word? I hate to try to elaborate on what Bill says. I'm not going to quote Kierkegaard, but I'll try to do as best I can. The International Task Force on Disease Eradication is located at the Carter Center. It's the only one in the world. And we have about 12 other organizations that work with us, but all the meetings are held under the aegis of the Carter Center. And we analyze constantly every human illness that exists on Earth and try to determine two things. Which disease can be eliminated, that is from a certain community or just say an entire nation, or like in this case in Latin America, and eradication, which is a major step forward, that is eradication from the entire Earth. And we have different elements of virulence in river blindness. The little black flies, for instance, in Latin America didn't fly nearly as far as they did do still in Africa. So we're not sure about whether we can take what we've done in Latin America, that is eliminate it, and expand it to Africa to eliminate it in every country, which will be eradication for the entire world. So that's a major question and a major problem is how to extend that element. But I believe that we are beginning to show, and I think we will demonstrate in the next few years, that river blindness can be eradicated from the entire world, every country on Earth. That, though, is a major undertaking, and it's been tried a few times by the World Health Organization unsuccessfully. They targeted a disease that they could not eradicate, and they had to back away. So they're very reluctant now to adopt this as a major goal, as Bill knows much better than I. But I believe that there's a very clear procedure underway now to prove that we can eliminate this from all the countries in the world, that is eradicate.
To get the official stamp of approval, we could either ask the person who asked the question, or we could ask the person who's the chair of the International Task Force on Disease Eradication and Elimination, who is at the podium as we speak, Don Hopkins.
No, I just wanted to, I don't have a question, but I wanted to underscore a couple of other aspects of the ramifications of this decision and this confluence of these three people and the ripples from that. And that is, in addition to medical students and others, and I have had the same experience as has been spoken of so many more students being interested in this. But I think of the health workers, and we've seen Don Bundy ask the people in APOC to stand up. I think of the health workers who've had the experience of working in this program, and the experience of that has thrown up and allowed governments to identify very good people. I think also of the people in the villages and how this program at village level has transformed their lives and changed their expectations and perhaps even changed their demands. People will put up with a lot, I like to say, until they realize they don't have to put up with it, and especially when they realize their neighbors are not putting up with it. I think governments are going to see increased pressure from their own people. There may not be a drug, there may not be a vaccine, but people, more and more people will be asking the question, why are we still suffering from all these things? Are there not things that we can do by organizing ourselves, by getting some additional help? Final point would be to note that, particularly in the Americas, on onchocerciasis, that the governments themselves are putting up a substantial part of the financial wherewithal that's been necessary to have this drug distributed. Final point is that in regard to onchocerciasis, I think the major challenge, I'm sure Frank Richards would underscore, is the existence of lower law in parts of Africa as a barrier to safe administration of these drugs on a mass basis. But I think with more research, we'll be able to do that. But there are a lot of people in areas with onchocerciasis without lower law that can be freed of this disease with the current tools.
Well, tell them who that was, clearly.
Thanks, Don. For those of you who don't know Don and President Carter and a team of hundreds and thousands are the team working on the eradication of guinea worm. It's the other disease in association with which we pronounce the word eradication. They're very, very close, and it's been an extraordinary effort to date. Thanks.
There's one other person from Merck that we need to mention, and she's also been mentioned already this evening, and that's Brenda Colatrella, who's here now officially representing Merck this evening, She's going to come here and give a final word from Merck. So Brenda, can I invite you up?
I'm very pleased to be here tonight to speak on behalf of Merck, and truly humbled to share the stage with three individuals who have made such a positive impact on the lives of millions of people and who have changed the course of global health. Dr. Roy Vagelos, whose courage in making an unprecedented commitment 25 years ago to donate as much Mectizan as needed for as long as needed for the elimination of river blindness, served as a catalyst for what has turned out to be such an important public health intervention. Dr. Bill Foege, whose insights and creativity established a mechanism for implementing the Mectizan donation program at a time when no one really knew how or even if this effort would work. And of course, President Carter, who continues to work tirelessly as a personal advocate and enthusiastic supporter of the efforts to get Mectizan to the populations that need it. We have been privileged tonight to hear them speak to us. And of course, none of us would be here without the scientific brilliance of Dr. William Campbell, who we are especially happy was able to join us tonight. Combine this foundation with the technical expertise of the World Health Organization and APOC and OAPA, the financial and fundraising abilities of the World Bank, the pioneering spirit of the non-governmental organizations, including the Carter Center, the commitment and political will of ministries of health, and the ingenuity and dedication of local communities, and the results, as you've heard tonight, speak for themselves. More than 1 billion treatments for river blindness provided in more than 30 countries to date. An estimated 40,000 cases of blindness prevented annually. Interruption of transmission and halted treatment with Mectizan in 4 Latin American countries, Colombia, Ecuador, Guatemala, and Mexico. Interruption of transmission in 9 areas of 5 African countries, Uganda, Nigeria, Senegal, Mali, and Sudan. And collaborative community-based models developed and sustained for the past 25 years to distribute Mectizan that have been applied to a wide range of other health needs, including distribution of vitamin A and other eye medications, treatment of other parasitic diseases, delivery of bed nets for preventing malaria, and immunizations. In 1998, the spirit of collaboration extended to the reach of the program beyond river blindness to lymphatic filariasis. And as you've heard, through a partnership with GSK and many other organizations, the Mectizan donation program is now helping to eliminate lymphatic filariasis in Africa. And we're witnessing good progress there as well. In Togo, for example, treatment for LF has been stopped nationwide. This, of course, must be followed by post-treatment surveillance activities, and this is also happening in more localized areas of Africa, such as in Plateau and Nasarawa states in Nigeria, supported by the Carter Center. In addition, today, beyond river blindness and LF, and through a number of mechanisms, we are coordinating and integrating our efforts and sharing best practices with one another and among the broader NTD community. So I think it's appropriate and it's important to stop for a moment to acknowledge and even celebrate the success that we have achieved to date. But I think you'll all agree that there's still a lot more work that has to be done, and we must look forward to that. And as we move forward, it will be critical to build upon these partnerships, to create new ones, to mobilize additional resources in order to build greater capacity while applying and sharing the lessons that we've learned to date so that these diseases soon become diseases of history. Thank you and good night.
Thank you so